One. Hello, I'm Anavultus, and welcome to the Anavultus Show. Today, I'm with the Carnal Conservative. We're going to begin our talk by talking a little bit about constitutions, how to write them, what we think about them, but we can expand to any topic. Okay? Please
All
introduce
right,
yourself.
I'm the Carnal Conservative. I mainly take a look at politics through a cultural lens, and my whole shtick is, the left has failed to live up to its promise of being open and sexually satisfying, hence the carnal part of the name. Um, so yeah, you actually reached out to me because I posted something about a new constitution. And yes, that is a child in the background.
Yeah, that's all right. Yes, I did
Um,
reach out to you in regards to a video you had posted talking about a new constitution, or at least a sort of amendment to a constitution that you had made.
so, what was it about that Constitution that caught your attention in particular? Because either you liked it, something you wanted to dislike about it, because it's a wild ride. I'll admit that.
Yeah, I think one thing that definitely stuck out was the idea that in order to change it, the leader of the country has to actually die.
Actually, it wasn't the yes. It's called the sacrifice of blood, and how it would work is if an executor, now when I say executor, it means that's the translation of a Supreme Court justice, someone of that level, someone of the judiciary who wanted to what they had to do is they had to say, I'm going to make a ruling, because in this new constitution they don't have judicial review. They can only act against people using the laws which the legislature has set forth and the executive is enforcing. So they can only, there's no judicial review against the other two branches. They can only address the people and interpret the law to the people. So when an executor decides that they're going to make a ruling that is contrary to the laws of a legislative and the executive, their life is forfeit. The thing about it is they do have the right to have their ruling enforced, but once they make that ruling, once they make that declaration, their life is at an end. Now they have an option to, before they are executed, to propose an amendment to the Constitution. After uh, they basically make a ruling that's against the laws of the land, and that's called the sacrifice of blood. And how it works is they write out uh, this amendment, how they think that things should be different, and then they're killed. And after they're killed, the people get uh, a vote on the amendment a year after the death of this executor.
Okay. And then if the people approve it, presumably, is it going to be a super majority or a simple majority?
Well, and that's something that I've been debating. I think that it should. I either no, it would be simple majority. It wouldn't be super majority. But here's where I'm stumped. Should it be a simple population majority, or should I use the electoral college? That's the only issue that I have with that.
Yeah, I see. Because obviously, if you use them differently, you might get different results, and it all depends really on what you want to emphasize and whether and whose opinion you value more.
Yeah. Um, I'm actually, I originally published it as simple majority vote, but I'm probably going to go back and go with the electoral college model because it's just we're a republic, we're not a direct democracy. You want that? Go to Greece. I'm not in. Yeah, so I'm gonna go with the electoral college 1 year after the death of the executor.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much the whole concept behind that idea. Now, in this Constitution video that I did, I also covered a whole other a lot of other things where the legislative can't pass any laws that don't equally apply to the legislative. It imposes term limits built into the system. The legislature's disbanded if we go into like $100,000 in debt. Just basic common sense stuff. Um,
Okay. So I'll say
so
okay, keep going.
go on. Oh, I was done actually.
Okay. Yeah, I've designed a whole system of government. I didn't just go to the US Constitution and remove things that I didn't like and then put other things. I actually decided to go to the very foundation and build everything up from there. But
Mm,
I will say that in regards to how the Constitution is changed in my system, the way it works is that any change has to be proposed uh, by a member of what is called the Supreme Magisterium, uh, and then what happens, which is at the highest level of government, and then in order for it to make it through, it has to be unanimously voted in favor of on the Supreme Magisterium, after which it goes to all the communities for which the 80% of the communities need to vote in favor of it, and then at least a year needs to have passed between the original vote in the Supreme Magisterium before it then goes back to the Supreme Magisterium, and then it will pass unless it is vetoed, and every member of the Supreme Magisterium then holds a free veto on the constitutional amendment. And then if nobody vetoes it, it goes through. So the reason why I designed it this way is because I think if an amendment is made, it should be something that is considered necessary for the continued existence of the state or the country. And therefore,
hmm
it makes sense that it should be proposed on the highest level because those are the people that are dealing with the structural problems on a country in the greatest scale. And at the same time, I want to make sure that it's not something that is going to unnecessarily oppress a large group of people, and therefore it needs a super majority among the communities in order to continue passing. But then you wait a year and you come back around again to the Supreme Magisterium just in case somebody else was voted in or somebody changed their mind and decided that this is actually something that we don't need and that we have to stop. So
mm,
it's to make it difficult because, in principle, when I design a constitution, I want it to be as holistic and future proofed as possible. And therefore, if a change should occur, ideally it should be something that is absolutely necessary rather than dealing with a part of government that should normally be dealt with on a different level. You know what I'm saying?
I I, un- I understand how your system is built and why it was built, and I agree with the sentiment that amendments to a constitution should be arduous and difficult. Here's my question, though: um, societies tend to adapt, and you have chosen a process through which to vet um, the your amendments, and that's fine. But what you have to understand is, I'm looking at this system, and I'm asking myself, how much corruption would be required to get an amendment passed, and what would it necessitate? Because I understand the assumption that the more difficult you make it, the more incorruptible the amendments would have to be. But from what I know of politics and nations, it's the exact opposite. The more difficult you make the process, invariably the more corrupt those who will be using it must be. Um, that's why I like the sacrifice of blood um, far more directly. It's not a process; it's a cost, and it's something that's going to cost the life of an individual for something that um, they feel convicted enough to pay for their lives. Then that's something worth listening to, even though it is minutia A, B, or C. Um, how would you feel? How do you? How do I want to ask this question? How would you compensate for the necessary amount of corruption that such a society would have to concoct to get something done in such a structure?
Well, I've had that in mind, and essentially, what I do is I ensure that all people who get elected are directly known by their electors, and at the same time, that there's no such thing as big money in the politics. And this is and the system is
Oh,
designed specifically to avoid that.
that's a hefty promise
It
to
is.
promise that never ever will big money be influencing politics. That almost sounds like utopia.
Well, I'm not saying that it won't be an influence at all in under any circumstance, but what I am saying is that the way in which I have designed the system essentially means that large and expensive campaigns wouldn't exist because they wouldn't be necessary. And the reason that is because I've decided to structure the political system in a strict hierarchy, which means
Ah,
that in order to get elected to a higher position, you can't appeal to a position that is uh, two steps below. You have to immediately appeal to the position that is one step below. And what this does, it avoids something that I see happening in the US, where what you can do is you can vote for things on the federal level if you can't win on the state level, or you can vote for things on the state level if you can't win on the local level, which is something that I don't like happening. So I make
yeah,
it.
they're yes, it does allow the senators to be a bit two-faced, and there's also another phenomenon in them voting for something, um, and they're not voting um, on their principles. They're voting out of pragmatism to say, "Oh, I voted for or against this." Um, different stages in which they voted for a bill is also something that I find inconsistent and worrying, because and it's all about how the news media can twist, oh, this senator voted for this bill on this date, and then uh, but at the same time they'll vote against it on a future date. So it's uh it's interesting.
Yeah. And what I do then, going further, it essentially means, because I see another problem in the growing size of the electorate. Because what I think happens is that as an electorate grows in number, it's more difficult for the person that's trying to get elected to actually personally know and be trusted by the electorate. So what has to happen then is a marketing campaign, and that's one way
Hmm.
to get a lot of money into politics. But by having this hierarchy system, it means that you're not trying to persuade, let's say, 10 million people to vote for you. You're maybe persuading a couple dozen people to vote for you, and you don't need a big marketing campaign for that. So
I
it,
see. So okay,
and of course, people are less
that would
likely. Yeah,
that
continue.
would be a massive legislative house, though.
Well, it wouldn't be on one level. As I said, it's a hierarchy. So what happens is there's multiple levels, and if the country gets bigger, you can actually add more levels, which is another problem that I see in the current system, is that we had to actually change the way in which we wanted to expand the House of Representatives, because we had a problem that there might become too many representatives. And I
Hmm.
see that as a problem, because what that means is that nowadays you can represent 10 times or more, depending on the state, the number of people that had been represented by a single person at the beginning of the country. So
Mm.
so what you see is that the districts for representatives have grown massively in population, but we don't actually have a way currently of dealing with that. And under my system, what happens is that once you get a certain number of people on a certain level, it splits, and then you just have more, and then it can grow infinitely. So even if we get quadrillions of people, let's say we go science fiction, interstellar, intergalactic, you can still keep things together, which is something that you couldn't do under the system that we currently have.
Huh. I mean, that's an interesting idea of splitting splitting levels and keeping that short up. Um, the question though is how would that system reflect the communities that it's supposed to represent? Like, uh, this has potential for gerrymandering.
Well,
Because here's another aspect of it. Um, Even in natural human societies, even in our most primitive states, a village can grow. It can double in size, but the leader remains the same. You catch what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like, when there is a society where there is a natural hierarchy and the population grows, the de facto leader doesn't necessarily step down or ask for someone else to take the reins, or he doesn't necessarily ask for a different village to be built. Um, so I'm wondering how necessary it would be to say, um, we need to split up this section of the population. The problem I see that is far more worrying in that case is not population size; it's population representation. Especially in places like California, where the population is in fact growing or fleeing, as we might say. Um, the problem is that there are certain segments of that population in California that do not have any political voice whatsoever. Trying Here's the situation in California. You have a, a, a large minority presence. You have the Asians, you have the Hispanics, you have the blacks, and then you have, of course, the white population. And most of these populations, regardless of their background, um, are rather in favor of being able to protect themselves, of having their Second Amendment rights. But they never. But year after year, their right to bear arms is continually diminished. And how does that? So, in my view, it's not so much a question of having enough people to represent them. It's honestly just giving them um, a voice at all, because I don't know any group in California that doesn't want their gun rights, and yet they're continually being suppressed. So
Well,
I think it's a amount of being honest um about voting,
I've thought about that
what I
too.
can see.
Okay, so the way in which my system deals with most issues is actually by decentralizing them as much as possible to the local level. So that would mean
Yes.
that the vast majority of social and economic policies would be highly localized. And when I say local, I don't mean the state level. I mean your village or your town, or if you're in a large
Hmm.
city, the district of that city that you're in. Um, and and that means, and I also have this idea that if somebody violates that, if somebody, let's say from a higher level of government, tries to start putting regulations where they aren't supposed to be, they can be sued and and be put to death. So
Oh, okay. Now you're
yeah,
talking my language.
yeah, essentially any type of corruption that happens on the higher government gets a death penalty.
Okay. So now I heard what you said. I'm going to just kind of bounce back what I heard, or what I'm hoping I heard. Um, a local, more numerous municipalities, or tribes, or clients, or however you want to call them, have an inverted pyramid um, legal right to attack those above them who are unjustly, um, how would you say, um, putting new burdens upon them, uh, practicing malfeasance. Like, is there sort of like an inverted hierarchy from the local level to the top?
Well, the way it works is that there are several courts, and each court is associated with a certain magisterium, which is a sort of representative or legislative body. And what you can do is that if somebody commits what would be considered a high crime, as in something that would destabilize the system, such as legislating on economic or social matters where they're not allowed to, you can go to any of these courts and sue the whichever person did this. And in that sense, everybody has a right to sue people on these issues. So yes, you could say that there's an inverted pyramid on that, but very often it's most likely going to be uh, people on the same level that are more likely to sue them because they're right there when it's happening. So
Hmm.
in that sense, I think another thing that might be important to do is to give out perhaps small rewards if you sue someone and it is proven that they have committed a high crime. And when I say proof, I don't mean this idea of a bunch of people have an opinion that this is the most likely thing that happened. I go for more a trial of fact kind of thing where it's beyond doubt what's happened. But if somebody's putting out legislation, it's pretty hard to say that that's not what they were doing. So,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
and of course, another thing, speaking of legislation, is that under my system, the only laws that can be enforced are laws that are written. So essentially, there's no such thing as common law, it's all civil law. And therefore, it becomes necessary for each jurisdiction to produce a civil code, which means everybody can, and then everybody can have access to that law and read it and know what the law is.
I see. And this civil law would be unique to each jurisdiction?
Well, it depends on what kind of legislation you're talking about. If you're talking about the economic and social laws, it is going to be not necessarily unique because communities can choose to coordinate their laws if they want to. For example, to facilitate trade or to help with various things. They're allowed to cooperate if they want to. Um, but on the higher levels of government, it's all the same. So everybody on the higher
Okay.
level, when outside of these communities, which is essentially just going to be the territory of the central government, everybody's under the same law there.
Hmm. So you have an ivory tower and the Wild West everywhere else.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's so much like an ivory tower because essentially the idea is that people should be in a community of some sort. Now, I actually allow, because I allow full economic and social legislation to be on the lowest level, it essentially means that you can have maybe a socialist somewhere, a capitalist somewhere, maybe even a fascist somewhere. Now, people do have some basic rights, so it's not as if people are going to be allowed to kill each other. That's something that's there's a set of laws that call for prohibitions on certain things in each jurisdiction. So, for example, nobody is allowed to steal, nobody is allowed to murder, to rape, to assault, to commit fraud, and such things in any jurisdiction. Uh,
Hmm.
but as for expanding beyond that, it's up to the local communities. Now, if somebody chooses to reside outside of a community in one of these areas that are probably just the government complex of buildings and perhaps a few other things. If somebody is not a citizen of a community in that sense and is only under the law of the government, I've designed it so that people have harsher penalties for crimes when they are in that status, and that's to prevent uh, a sort of economic capital from forming. I don't want the government to be linked with the economy. So, in that sense, I want to make sure that people don't want to live in the government complex. I want to have a sort of
Huh.
separation of state and economy in that sense.
And will this requirement be true for those in the higher magisteriums?
Yes, it's true for everyone. Everyone is tried under
Okay.
the same court procedures.
That's interesting. I like it. I don't disapprove of it. I'm just there's a part of me that's questioning its necessity, but I don't mind it. Um, I just I don't feel the need to enforce natural tribalism.
Well, it's not necessarily to enforce tribalism. It's to prevent what I like to say let's say the Paris phenomenon. Because if you go to France, what you
Hmm.
see is that the economy, the society, the culture, everything is centered around Paris. Essentially, France. There's two parts of France: Paris and everywhere else, and
Hmm.
France is more important than everywhere else in France. Uh, Paris, that is, and and so I essentially want to prevent that phenomenon where there's big investors and all the financial authorities and institutions essentially being linked with the government in that sense. That's something I want to prevent.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. I mean, I guess we sort of have the same thing in the US, but not nearly. We're far too big. Like you have to be rather than the national capital, you would have to find some other big city that might not even necessarily be a political um center point. Um it seems more like a geographic problem than a constitutional one.
Well, what you have to remember is that I'm not designing this specifically for any particular country. I'm trying to think in a general metaphysical sense of being prepared for any possible situation. So let's say you're living in a very small country, then that's a different situation. Or if you're in a very large country, that's a different situation. If you have advanced technology, that's a different situation from being in the Stone Age. But I want to be prepared for anything.
Hmm. I I mainly have centered myself around my immediate surroundings. Um, I, even on modern global international shindigs, I'm primarily concerned with my own nation. I don't I have how would you say I don't want to call it a disdain, but I honestly couldn't be bothered with things like getting involved in French politics or the entire concept of an EU to me is generally repulsive. Um, but I'd actually like to take a look at your constitution because honestly, as we're discussing it, for me, it's more like an idea. If I could get it uh, in concrete, in a written form, then I might have a more sound opinion on it. I'm taking bits and pieces in and learning about them as we go along. Um, no, this sounds interesting, but as I said, my system was very simply just taking what we have in the United States Constitution and looking back retroactively and saying where did we mess up? What are things that need to be remedied? And what we needed remedied very simply to preserve the original intent of the Constitution was a ensuring that there is true equality among members of Congress as civil servants, that they are serving their fellow men, they are not above their fellow men. Going back and realizing that hey, non-germane amendments produce bullshit. If you're going to make a law about something, make sure everything in the law is about the topic at hand. I don't want um, I don't want funding for the environment to be in a bill that's supposed to balance the budget. I want it to be very streamlined, and it's just sticking to what you know and what you have experienced is basically what my formula was essentially what my prescription was about. And the main thing was, in fact, the betrayal of the Supreme Court, and the way it can simply declare law through judicial review is something that I find has imposed the tyranny of the minority. And I'll be perfectly honest, even though liberal thought assumes that there is a tyranny of the majority, I can't find any such examples of it, not legally.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So so almost it, describe to me the metaphysics of the foundation work that went into this constitution that you've built, which I haven't had the privilege of reading yet. But
Okay,
what was
first of
the
all,
underlying idea?
I'd like to emphasize that currently, while I have started a little bit on writing the Constitution, I've primarily dealt with the groundwork ideological issues and general principles upon which the Constitution will be based. So
Mm,
the things I say aren't phrased and structured in the way that it would be in a constitution, and the reason that is because most of it hasn't been written yet, and it's a large undertaking because I've decided to reject common law entirely, which means I have to literally write every single thing. um, but the groundwork, I would say, philosophically, um, the name of this system is koinonism, and I've got the 10 points of koinonism, which are 10 general ideas that the ideology is based around. So
hmm
um,
All right, so
the first
quick,
one
the
is statism. So essentially, I because the system is a system of government, it obviously requires a government. So in that sense, it is in opposition to anarchy by necessity,
all right, that's fair enough.
and that's why I call it a statist system. I also think statism is useful for a number of other reasons, and one of them is the division of labor. In that, if you have a government, there are certain things that you can do in a government that would be inefficient if everybody had to do them, which you would have under
Mm.
anarchy. So, in that sense, having a government ensures a type of division of labor, not just horizontally, as in politicians being different from medical doctors, but also vertically, as in people having to deal with international relations as opposed to simply people coming over from other countries and doing whatever they want. Um,
Mm.
Now, the second point is political realism. And what this means is essentially that I acknowledge the reality of a number of things, including the reality of power, that in order for a government to persist, a government must have some strength in order to enforce uh, itself. Also,
hmm
the government must necessarily be able to engage with other governments internationally in order to protect itself and ultimately perhaps to prevail against any potential enemy. Now, political realism is a relatively in-depth school of international relations, so I'm not going to get into everything on there. Um,
Well, I like The Prince. It's a good book. Everyone should. It's required reading, in my opinion.
yeah, have you read it in original Italian?
No, that would be why on earth would I make it harder?
Well, Italian's my second language, um, and English is my third. But anyway,
Ah, okay.
uh, the third point is reformism, and what that essentially means is that I prefer that if you're going to change something in the system, it should be changed inside the system rather than having a revolution. Because by having a revolution, you may also legitimize revolutions against what you had a revolution for. So I'm generally against the idea of revolutions in general. Um,
I'm right there with you.
yeah, and the fourth one is, and I borrowed this term from another man, cellular democracy, and that's essentially a system where instead of having a centralized system where everybody votes on one level, or a system where you have only one or two layers of representatives, in a cellular democracy, you essentially have groupings that vote for a body, and those bodies above them then vote for another body above them, etc., until you reach the top. And I had mentioned this earlier. Um, the fifth point is communal liberty, and that means that in the commune or in the community, uh, that that the community generally has a large degree of liberty in how they want to organize themselves socially and economically. And the benefit is twofold: one, for the people in the communities, so that they can, in essence, pursue the type of society in which they want to live in, and the other one is for the government, because it essentially reduces the number of grievances that people have against the government, making revolution less likely, since they can achieve most of what they want on the local level anyway.
Hmm.
Um, the sixth one is free association, and that essentially means that you can choose to leave a community, and they can't force you to stay in a community if you don't want to be a part of it. At the same time, the the communities don't have to let people in if they don't want to.
Okay.
Did you have a problem there?
No,
No.
none whatsoever.
Okay. And now we're getting into some economic point. Well, not necessarily economic. Fiscal points. Communalized poll tax is the seventh point, and what that essentially means is that the central government uh, puts out the tax requisition, and then on the communal level, it's decided how much they want, or in which ways they want to tax the people in their community. But each community gets an amount of taxes requisitioned based upon the population in the community. So that essentially means that you can actually have different ways of taxing, but the idea is that each community is taxed equally based on the number of people living in it. And this does an interesting thing in that it means that the government has to be watchful about overspending, because if they overspend, then they end up destroying their tax base. And the government also ha- and the communities also have to be watchful about the stability and economic viability of their system, because if they don't have a system that's tax efficient, then their community will suffer greatly, because it won't be able to keep up with the taxes.
I like it. The government hands out a bill, and each society decides how they're going to scrounge it up.
Yeah. And then the eighth one is budget dependent taxation, which essentially builds on the previous one, which means that in order to tax, the government needs to have a budget. So it's not as if the government just says, give me all the money in the world. The government can't just do that. They have to actually have an itemized list as to which parts of a government things are going to be spent on. And remember, there's no social and economic taxation at the top. Sorry, social and economic policies at the top level, which means that there won't be any kind of spending of that kind. It'll mostly be the military and strategic infrastructure for the military, as well as essential government functions such as diplomacy and the maintenance of a currency. And
Mm,
speaking of currency, that brings me to the ninth point, monetarism. Monetarism is essentially a system of currency where you manage the amount of currency in a certain way, as opposed to messing around with massive inflation or deflation and stuff like that, like the Federal Reserve does. What you do in monetarism, or at least in my system of monetarism, is that it's population dependent, which means that the government can only increase the amount of money in circulation if the population increases, which puts it at a level of predictable inflation or deflation, depending on maybe the economy goes really well, in which case the currency would deflate if the economy grows faster than the population.
mm.
And the final point is constitutionalism, essentially that all these things have to be constitutional, that the government should be run based on the Constitution. And I even go so far as to say that on the higher levels of government, you can't have any permanent law that's not part of the Constitution. So all laws have a natural sunset clause put in them.
Wait, so repeat that concept again. All laws have a natural sunset clause.
What that means is that all laws, except for amendments to the Constitution at the highest levels, have an expiration date.
Ah, okay. Now ooh,
Which means
that's
that
actually interesting.
in order to keep those laws on the books, they have to essentially repass them. Which means that
All right.
if they end up building large amounts of legislation, it's going to make it very difficult for them.
Yeah, they'll the docket can only support so much maintenance.
Yeah. So what do you think?
I like it as a concept, but I'm wary because it seems to try to reinforce things that occur naturally. And I'm very much against the notion of trying to um, dictate or replicate something that nature in and of itself has already handles perfectly well on her own. I would like laws that emphasize freedom of association, but I'm not sure if that would necessitate what you would call cellular democracy.
Yeah.
Is that I'm not sure if that is what is required. And it might be, and again, I have I have an apprehension because you have these multiple layers that are constantly dividing as the population grows. And in my mind, it creates a veritable labyrinth. And for anything to function in that labyrinth, it would require a massive conspiracy. And I'm not comfortable with success within any system to be legitimate and the result of conspiracy. Um, I like that these things are intended to be as safeguards, but when the safeguards are nigh impenetrable, one should be incredibly, incredibly pessimistic about any success that comes out of such a system. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Um, see, and from what I understand, and I understand that there are um, legal like check marks. There are there are qualifications that each individual has to take on when they act in government that's supposed to counterbalance these that nature or that tendency. But I'm not certain there's anything sufficient enough because something is going to find a way. Some will is going to break through. Something is going to game the system. And the question is, we need. I don't. If a system of that magnitude or that potential magnitude um could succeed, um, it's game over. At least you have to keep it. I like that the laws have to continually be voted back in. That's a nice counterbalance. But again, I find myself concerned with the amount of corruption that would be necessary for such for anything to get done.
I think I think it would actually be the opposite, because I think
Okay.
that the bigger this would get, the less corruption there would be at the top. And that's essentially because in order to get higher up, you essentially need to gain the trust of various people. And because it is all based on personal relationships between people on each level, it creates a situation where it's difficult to get up higher by screwing over the people below you, because they will know you personally and they'll be able to vouch against you. And if you're trying to get elected to a higher body and then someone comes in and and goes and talks about how they've been screwed over by you, that's going to, of course, make it a lot harder to get elected, because this essential idea is an idea of a chain of trust and reliability that I think doesn't exist in the system of government that we currently have due to the size of the electorate. So what I'm
Mm.
saying is that ideally the people elected very locally are people that are known and trusted by the people in their community. Ideally, that is. Now, I know that's not always true, but I think it's probably more reliable than, let's say, doing it on a statewide level. And therefore, I follow that same principle all the way up. And the assumption, therefore, is that there's a refinement on each level of government that leads to less corruption the higher you go, because you're immediately accountable to the people directly below you. Now, of course, I know that there's people that disagree with me that this is how it would work, but that's how I envision it anyway.
Mm. Uh, Now, I see your vision, and it troubles me because, again, you might be accountable to those below you, and my problem is, are those people? Uh, and that does not assuage my fear. It doesn't change. Um, so, for example, if we were to say that there was a radical, um, let's say there's a Hail Hydra organization growing in your government.
Yeah,
What I'm saying is to get any agenda passed through, to get any legislation passed through, there would hide the Hail Hydra would need to exert a massive amount of effort, a massive amount of individuals, a massive amount of um, sedition and corruption to get their goals accomplished, and to how would you say, to potentially corrupt that which you have built and destroy that which you have sought to maintain. Um, Taking this from a conservative point of view, um,
yeah,
I don't. The problem would be for such an organization or for such a corruption to occur is that they would need to be accountable to those below them. I don't think that would be a problem. I think that would be um, almost helping them out. I think you would have a far their objective would be removing those above them in their way.
yeah.
Again,
But the
I'm
thing is,
speaking hypothetically.
if they're caught at any point, essentially committing sedition or conspiring to destroy the government or to forcefully take it over, that's a death penalty offense. So they
Hmm.
have to keep a pretty tight conspiracy in order to make this work, and in order to infiltrate the government to the highest level, that have to go essentially through very many different jurisdictions and spend years and maybe even decades working their way up, hopefully without anybody finding out throughout the whole time. Because the moment somebody finds out, they can sue that person and get them dead. So, but I think the difference here is that what I see is, let's say you have 10 million people as your electorate pool voting for one
Hmm.
person. How many of those people actually know the person they're voting for?
Oh, like point not 1%. I mean, it would be ridiculously insignificant
Yeah.
number of people who actually know the
and
person.
and that's why I think that this system would probably work better than that, because on one
You see,
system you actually have a chain of accountability and reliability where you know people. On the other system, most people don't know you, and essentially the way you get elected is through big donors.
now that's okay. Let's say you actually succeed in getting. Here's what I'm having trouble envisioning. Here's what I'm having trouble picturing. Um, you say that in your system you would be accountable to those who directly know you. That's fine. How would that dynamic change as you go up higher in the chain? As you go up in the chain, would you not naturally still be held to um, a larger group of people, or would you be entering into a group that collectively this group would be accountable to a larger uh, population, or they would affect a larger population. I'm not sure exactly how this works, and I'm not sure exactly how you would escape that reality that the more competent and the higher you climb, the more people you can affect with your decisions.
Well, the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of things that would affect people in their daily lives are already regulated on the local level. So what the higher levels exist for is arbitration between the lower levels, and at the top level the international dynamic. So in essence,
Ah,
there's actually very little legislation that is being produced in the intermediate levels.
okay. That makes a lot more sense. Hmm. All right. That does answer my question. Um, was there anything else that you wanted to discuss? Because I'm serious. You should send me like a an outline of this system that you're building.
Well,
Um,
I've built a website where I periodically uh, work on it. So if you want the link
all
to that,
right.
I can give you that.
All right. Let's have it.
Okay, just a moment. Let me get on Discord here. Here we go. It's coinonism.com.
All right.
But anyway, what are your thoughts on the way that the police is responding to the riots?
Which police? Because as far as I'm concerned, if you're a rioter, you should be put down. I'm I have nothing. I have nothing. Nothing complimentary about in a nation where you have freedom of speech. Like if you have the right to voice your grievance and the right to express yourself, you have no right to start throwing bricks, Molotov cocktails, uh, fireworks, any of that nonsense. No one has taken your voice. So
I agree
as
on
far as
that.
I'm concerned, uh, they need to be. I want them in jail. I want the rioters in jail. As far as I'm concerned with the police, it's that they're not being harsh enough.
I
They are
agree.
not being enforcing the law is not fascism. It's the law. It's liberalism. You don't, and liberalism means being held accountable to the laws of that land.
Well, I
As
wouldn't
long
even
as
say
you
it's
haven't.
I wouldn't even say it's liberalism. I think it's just realism in general. Every country that wants to hold people accountable needs to actually enforce its laws.
And there's nothing about the police telling you that you can't be a violent piece of shit that's unreasonable or unjust. So as soon as you see someone who, I think anyone even remotely associated with these people should be just handcuffed, thrown in jail. I don't think that they should be.
Okay, I'll
There is we have a huge problem with the judges just letting these people off.
yeah.
Just, oh yeah, you spent a night in jail, just go home. No, I want them tried. I want them to do their time.
Okay,
That's
I'll
not happening either.
I'll take your prison time, and I'll raise that. Okay, because in my view, I think that for treason, people can get the death penalty. but for insurrection, they get 10 years according to the U.S. Code. I think that
Hmm.
I don't think there should be a distinction in the punishment between those two things. I think people that try to destroy their country actively, just like people that betray their country to other countries, should also get the death penalty.
No, you're not going to get a disagreement from me there. I'll be honest. Just I have no problem with the communist to face wall.
Because I'm all in favor uh, of free speech, but if people start getting violent and then they resist the law enforcement and the police, then that's actually it stops being a situation of people being simply unreasonable. People start becoming an existential threat to the country.
Um, I actually have a solution for all this. You might not like it, but just hear me out. We make Portland and California a caliphate, a Sharia zone where the Muslims can congregate and conquer and do their thing. And it's not like they're going to for diversity's sake be able to say, I want them. I really think it might be worth our while to let California and Seattle, wherever that is, you know, become a caliphate region.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So that's my views on Antifa. Is there? I would say they're rebels without a cause, but they're actually worse. They're useful idiots, and I don't. It's hard for me to have any respect or care for someone who is uh that stupid.
Yeah, I don't think that they're going to accomplish very much. What I mean by that is
Um,
they're obviously going to destroy things, but I don't think that they're going to have their own legacy. They're not going to be writing their own history books down the line.
yeah, but I'm still concerned about those writing the history books for them. I still have that problem in my country to deal with. Like we still have this problem of people who are sympathetic to those who want to insurrect and commit treason against the country. That's still an issue, and it needs to be dealt with. Like I would be willing to trade for uh I would be willing to trade uh erasing all student debt, like all loans to colleges and whatnot. I would be willing to forgive all that debt for the complete eradication of the Department of Education. Just wipe it off the map.
Yeah, I think that'd be fair.
Just well, yeah, because
Just take all
it's
the money that the department that would have gone to the Department of Education, and then use that to buy off the debt.
no. I wouldn't buy it off. I would let the financial institutions, I would let the colleges themselves eat it. They
Okay.
get nothing. Because if the students had lived up to the promise that they were sold by the colleges, they would have jobs to pay back the loan. Most of them don't. That's just the sad fact of it, and most people are in debt for this education that was supposed to be a meal ticket. That's how it was advertised. Um, it they don't treat degrees the way that degrees should be treated. A degree means that you are competent in a field and you have the potential to return that investment and your studies back to the college and give back to that field of study. But that's not what a degree means anymore. So the idea that these educational institutions have any honor or gravitas is pretty much dead, and it's something that they did of their own making. So and I'll be honest, I am not one to reward failure. The education system, the collegiate system has failed. And their only response is to raise their tuition fees and bilk a whole new generation, and that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even cancel the debt. I wouldn't even take the money from the Department of Education and pay off these institutions. As far as I'm concerned, they can sink. As far as I'm concerned, um, I would probably take the money from the Department of Education and I'd give it to parents to educate their children with. Like I would probably use it as a tax incentive for um for families with two parents in the home, preferably a mother and a father, to educate their child.
So as a sort
Simple.
of refundable tax credit.
Yeah, for families to educate their own children with. And you know what? It's a dirty secret, but it shouldn't be. Your quality of education is largely reflective of your life at home. The chances of you getting into a charter school, the chances of your parent reading to you at night, all of these things that all of it that indicates whether or not you will be a successful person economically and scholastically and all these other things is largely dependent on your home life, your life at
Yeah.
home.
And
And
unfortunately,
so
it seems a lot of parents aren't really interested in parenting their children, and a lot of families aren't really interested in being families anymore, and that's a big problem.
and it's not as if that trend is going to be sufficient to change reality. That trend means nothing when it comes to what produces success. And so when the reason I would love this cash to give to parents is because it would incentivize success. Like, I want you to actually think it would refocus their priorities. They wouldn't they'd say, hey, this money is for educating my kid. And that creates an ethos that creates something at least in the back of their head goes, this is something we're supposed to do, as opposed to what we have now, which is, oh, I send my child off somewhere else and they deal with that side of it. That's the real to me, that's the real cancer, is the parents presuming someone else can do better than they can.
Yeah.
um so that's pretty much where I stand on that. uh do, do,
I do think that I would agree that that is something that it could be done. It could be a useful incentive. Now, of course, based on the system of government that I propose, it would be more decentralized. But yeah, it would still be possible.
yeah, and it's how do I put this? Ever since Trump won, I think those who elected him need to be far more bold in what they want. Um, And things like shutting down the Department of Education, that should be within our toolkit. It should be something that we actively promote. Now we're a little shy because we're still waiting for the wall to get built, but slowly and surely that is in fact coming to fruition. It's just taking a lot of time.
So,
But no, we need to be go on.
would you consider yourself a very pro-Trump person?
Yes, I'm very pro Trump. Not you have to understand, it's something about being pro Trump is I've heard it put. I forget who said this. I think it was Greg Gutfeld. He said that it was either it was Greg Gutfeld or Steve Bannon, and I can't remember which one, but it was those who take Trump seriously don't take Trump literally, but those who take Trump seriously don't take him. No, those who don't take Trump seriously take him literally, and it's an odd place because um I don't look I don't look up to Trump as a beacon of morality. There's no that's not what that's not who he is. That's not what he represents. Um I'm very pro Trump because I like the direction he's going. And none of the policies and the things he actually does um are have done the country any harm. And I can't okay, I take that back. There is one thing. There's at least one thing he's done that's pissed me off. The bump stock ban. That was bullshit. Um, but then again, as a Trump supporter, you expect that shit because he's not right wing per se. He didn't advertise as a gun nut, or you know that hey, this is some business guy from New York. He might do something wacky like that. So there's a lot of wiggle room when taking into account what this particular individual might or might not do.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's that he's generally pushing in the right direction, but he's not perfect. That's essentially what you're saying.
And that's something that you assume about this person right off the bat. Like like it's you cannot be a dogmatic Trump supporter. As you can support him fanatically, but it cannot come from a source of dogmatism. And that's what most people don't understand about Trump supporters is we're not dogmatic on issues, nor are we necessarily fanatic about the person. You just understand that this is someone that the country needs mostly as a symbol. Like, um, it's a symbol that says we as the American people voted this person is because he said what needed to be said. That's mainly what Trump is about, is people reasserting what Trump is the people telling politics where the lines are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Still, yeah, I'm very much a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
um, what are your leanings? Who do you like?
Well, the thing is, I've essentially put myself in a position where ultimately I'll have to eventually start my own political party. But in regards to people that have run, uh, in 2016, I liked Ted Cruz because I liked his policies. primarily. But I didn't like Trump enough to vote for him though, so I ended up voting Constitution.
Cruz is all right. Mm. You see, before Trump came on the scene, I was actually a Rand Paul guy.
Yeah,
Um, and Ted Cruz is actually he's not on my good side. He came out against the he said he said that he's never met a Proud Boy and that we're all bigots. Well, I have pictures with Senator Cruz. He has met several Proud Boys, and he's felt the need to malign all of us unilaterally.
yeah.
So I'm a little I'm a little wary of Ted Cruz right now at this moment.
Well, there's similar things people have said that about Donald Trump, but so yeah, I can
Now
see.
he
I can
did
see why.
pardon Roger Stone.
But yeah, essentially what I'm saying though is that back in 2016, I was a more paleocon sort of Tea Party person, but ultimately I've decided to really go off the beaten path, you could say.
Yeah, I ascertained as much because what you're presenting to me is it's very different. It's not something that's it's not something that would come intuitively to someone with a paleocon leaning, and I do consider myself of that school of thought, like the very conservative, very pretty much protectionist to a reasonable degree, um, putting the nation first. Like I do I like the paleocon message. It's something that should be reinvestigated with much enthusiasm, but I don't know. Those who are pushing for it seem do so in a very bizarre manner. Well, let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Would you care to
Well,
elaborate?
actually, when one of the the Bibles of the Proud Boys is "The Death of the West" by Pat Buchanan. We read before our meetings a passage out of that book where he essentially tells us the time to apologize is over. We might have participated in slavery, but we're also the ones who ended it. Let's just put an end to this nonsense. And so it's the paleocons. They're represented by people like Ann Coulter, Michelle Malkin, and bizarrely Gavin McInnes. And it's how'd you put it? Gavin is hilarious. He's a comedian figure. Um he's also the most important thing about it though, and the reason why I find it surprising is because despite him having this image of being a drug-addled drunk, he's also a father. He's also someone who is willing to fight for his country. He's uh, literally the rabid Scotsman that he presents himself to be. And it's a far cry from the tight-laced conservatives of yesteryear who were admittedly clutching their pearls, who were it. This is not a form of conservatism. The people putting forth paleoconservatism are the of those who put up with the baby boomers. And that's strange.
Yeah.
It's 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 incredibly strange.
Yeah.
That paleoconservatism is being venerated by those who had to have to rebel against the 60s and the 70s. Like we're not we're looking at paleoconservatism as something that we want to rediscover because those who came immediately before us have failed us.
Yeah.
And I come from a I'm actually an anathema to this. I come from a family who was authentically conservative, authentically cultural, authentically paleo in just who we were. I actually came from I didn't come from a broken family. There was no real like rebellious stage. Like I lived the paleo conservative values and discipline and lifestyle. And so what I see is I'm waking up in a political world where everyone wants to capture what I've had my whole life, and it's very strange. It's very strange because through the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, being a religious conservative is something that was sneered, something that was maligned. And to see people who had ultra libertarian leanings trying to kind of scratch and claw their way back to a wholesome uh, family life and a wholesome society is quite the scene to behold.
So are you very religious?
Extremely,
Yeah.
extremely religious.
As am I.
And yes, and yes, I still want to put traitors to death. I have no problem with this.
Yeah, I think that's an entirely justified, at least in Christianity.
Oh, it's as far as I can tell, it's justified in nearly every religious context. And I do not like one of the things that annoys me about mainstream Christianity is, and particularly in how mainstream Christianity interacts with um, atheism and secularism, is the willingness to let them define our positions outside of scripture.
I
There
agree. That
is,
is a problem.
for example, the how I'm not struggling to think of examples. There are plenty of examples. I'm just trying to drill it down into one concise statement. You do not create a definition or idea for God that he himself has not made for himself. Because what happens is when we talk about God or we talk about deity or his alleged attributes and virtues, in my mind, it is a grave error uh, to speak for God on that on those topics because he's more than willing to speak for himself. Um, and what I see is mainstream Christianity saying we perceive God as X, and then the uh, The opponent saying, well, in Scripture, he is Y, and these are not the same. What is wrong with you? And on in those discussions, I'm going to have to side with the atheist. It is foolish for Christians um, to fall back on philosophy when they should be rooted in doctrine. That's just my 2 cents.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. But yeah, speaking about the political elements, I think where I deviate from the mainstream politics in the US or in the West as a whole is that I go back to the 17th century, and from there I basically reject several of the premises of the Enlightenment in 17th and 18th century.
Interesting. Now, I my religion is a very we practice a very primitive form of Christianity. It's not I don't believe in Constantine, the councils. I don't believe in any of the. We go back to a form of Christianity that existed before the advent of the belief in the Trinity. Um, because as is how do I put this? There is a story of how the Trinity kind of as an idea came forth out of early Christendom, and it was formulated by a man named Origen. And our our belief system in regards to the Trinity and all of that predates the Greek philosophical intervention of this Christian philosopher named Origen. And ultimately, where it takes our doctrine and how it affects us philosophically is it allows us to view God as an individual. And it throws into question a lot of these medieval notions of God's character. One of which is a questioning of altruism. In my humble opinion, altruism is not a divine attribute. I cannot look at scripture and justify the concept or statement that God is an altruist. Um, it is my view that, and you have to understand what altruism. Now, I know I'm rambling, but for a long time, altruism was a virtue or principle that was expected of most politicians who claim to have a Christian ethos. And is that something that you find yourself questioning as well?
Well, I think I've developed, okay, in my own hermeneutic of a moral system, and I would say that what matters more than altruism is the will of the authority. So in that sense,
Okay,
if it is,
continue on with that.
yeah, if it is the authority's desire to be altruistic, then that is justified unless it violates a higher authority.
Correct, because when okay, let me throw you that this is both a I guess you could say a religious sentiment and a philosophical foundation. Do you believe, would you say that God is the manifestation of logos?
Um, well, there's different ways to define that. Um,
Okay.
so yes and no. It all depends on how you define it, because the logos has different meanings depending on the context in which it is used. So in the context in which it is used in the Bible, I would say yes. Not as a
Hmm.
manifestation, but as an equivocation, perhaps. Because I don't think God
Okay.
comes out of something, so he's not manifested from something.
No, I understand that that nuance, that need. Um However, from my point of view, I would say that the position of deity is not one of logos per se. I think it is in fact a pos- for example, how do I put this?
Well,
God is not God because it's reason. He's God because of his power.
exactly.
Ultimately, is yes. It's not logos per se. It's ethos. Either there is a God and he created the world and all things in it, or he did not create those things. It is a position of power. And when you're talking about something that is related to a position of power, we're not talking about logos per se. That's ethos.
Yeah.
That's um
Well, the way I describe it is that um, an absolute will with absolute power produces absolute justice, or it, or produces absolute values, which are then come to absolute virtues.
now that brings up a whole other debate between objective and subjective morality, tangentially. And that's where my brain wandered off to. And it's and I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, I have to bring in the nature between objective and subjective morality. And what I primarily have to say about that is those who argue for subjective morality are arguing that because different viewpoints exist, that morality is out of necessity subjective. That's not the claim of those who subscribe to objective morality. Objective morality is a very realist approach. It's a very results based philosophy. It's about that which, when in practice, is effective, not that. When we talk about objective and subjective morality, those who are advocating for subjective say want to talk about people's beliefs. Those who are arguing for an objective morality are not talking about your beliefs. We're talking about the consequences of your beliefs.
Well, I don't think it's
Those are two very different
it's that
paradigms.
specifically so much. I would say that what makes it objective is its direct enforcement, the power that is put into it, and and of course God judges all, and in that sense, it is God's justice which has power over all. But I will say that I don't think that there's necessarily a link between the idea of prosperity and that making it objective. In other words, if hypothetically, and this is only a hypothetical, uh, the virtues enforced by the absolute authority were ones that actually led to the destruction of people, then I would say that it would still be objectively moral, even if it led to the destruction of those people.
Well, who said that the destroyal in and of itself is actively immoral?
Exactly, because it is the authority that determines what is moral or immoral. And if it is moral for people to suffer and to be destroyed, then that is what morality is.
Well, and the fact of the matter is we experience that on our own mortal plane. We have laws where when the stars align and the system is put in place and it acts as it's supposed to, certain individuals must be destroyed. They must be brought to justice. They must have justice prevail upon them. And the idea that that reality would not exist for a god or a deity is, in my mind, uh, either ignorant or completely unnecessarily idealistic.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So that was a bit of a bird walk. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So, what is the difference between your perception of what the Trinity is, as opposed to, let's say, how most people would say it is?
Um, I believe that there is literally a Father and a Son and a Holy Ghost, that they are three distinct persons. They are three distinct individuals. There is a nature of unity in them, but that's largely an organizational unity, an ethical unity, an ideological unity. Very much like how in Scripture it says that a husband and wife are meant to be one. So the Father and Son are one. They are one in purpose. They're one in function. Even when the Savior was pleading with the Father that that the disciples, the 12 disciples, would be one in purpose and in unity, as he says later in the prayer that the Father and the Son are united. Um, so there is no metaphysical notion to Trinity. It's simply the Godhead. It's simply uh, three individuals working toward a united purpose. It's not. It's it's a call to recognize the individuals for who they are.
Okay. Would you say that they share in the deity?
As in they share in As in they share in the glory? No. All of the glory goes to the Father. Even the Son said the Son submitted, and all of the glory goes to the Father. There, um, that's that's doctrine.
Well, that's not what I'm questioning. What I'm questioning is the Son also God, and
Well,
is the Holy
yes,
Spirit also God?
um, yes, out of necessity.
Okay.
That's the calling. That's who they are. Um, and there is a confusion, and that there was this similar confusion in the early church, a branding issue, if you were, if you will. They had problems being a technically monotheistic religion, worshiping the Father whom Christ had preached of, and acknowledging that there were in fact other deities in the system was something that they found very odd. Um, and so they concocted this Trinity notion. But even though the early Christians believed in other gods, they were commanded to only worship one, and that's a consistent theme throughout the entire canon. An acknowledgement other gods, but the complete um the complete devotion to one only.
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what the difference is between what you're saying and what those that disagree with you are saying.
Oh, most um and this is from what I understand, most people don't they actually literally believe in a metaphysical blob that defines deity almost entirely out of existence. And it's very strange because there are a ton of apologetics. There's the Trinity is like an egg. One is the shell, one is the that just a whole bunch of analogies that in my mind just don't flush with the canon. Um, it, there are some faiths who like, there's a bizarre triangle where they say um, God is not, Jesus is not, the Holy Ghost is not the Father, and yet they're all God. Um, the difference between that diagram and what I believe is that Christ is a God, the Father is a God, and the Holy Ghost serves the function of a God. Jesus Christ has a physical body. Father has his own physical body, and the Holy Spirit is a personage of spirit. Like this is not complicated. And um, even to those who preach of the Trinity, for them it is a grand mystery that they can't seem to solve. And from my perspective, it's not a mystery; it's simply nonsense.
Hmm. Okay, let's move on to something else. Unless you're running low on time.
I actually do have to jet. I do have a child at home, and she's starting to
Okay,
fuss.
that's fine. So, any final remarks you'd like to make?
Um, no, just I will. Um, I'll take a look at that Koyanism
Yeah.
website that you sent me, and just go ahead check out the channel. And if there's anything else on my content that you wanted to that caught your eye, just hit me up and we'll talk about it again.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on, and I'd also like to thank the wonderful audience, both those who watched live, as well as those who may watch later. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all next time. Anavultus over and out.